Have you noticed anything about the videos and classes so far? We've only been using line to describe form. We haven't done any shading or thought much about it. Obviously, I think that drawing with line is more important than shading, and we aren't done with line. When and if we draw from a skeleton and a model, we will continue to investigate the describing of form, of drawing, by using line in various exercises that involve contour lines, cross-contour lines, gestural lines, and swarms of saccade-like lines that merge into apparitions of described form. But for the moment, we'll briefly set aside line to some extent, apart from using it to lightly sketch in a subject, and then we'll concentrate on drawing by describing the effects of light and shade on form. When lighting is from the right angle, it can suggest form quite astonishingly. Line is wonderful. Line allows us to have a kind of X-ray vision. With line, we can draw forms within forms. Line drawing is superb for product design drawing for these reasons. You can see through exterior outlines to clusters of lines that define structures within. After 45 years or more of drawing the human form from life, I know what lies underneath the sack of clothes that hang from human flesh. I kind of know what people look like underneath their garb. I have a kind of X-ray vision. Of course, I can't actually see their hidden birthmarks, moles, dimples, saggy bits, or tattoos, but I can look at a person in clothes and draw them, estimating and inferring their general form from the way their clothes hang. From countless hours of studying the human figure, musculature, and skeletons, traditionally trained artists can see from the way clothes hang the structural evidence, the evidence for the structures that lie beneath. Surface topography alone can provide enough clues for a more substantial drawing that includes inner structures that result from recognition, a limited degree of actual hard memory, and stored internal biomorphic templates arrived at from countless hours of drawing the human form. This vision, this active imagination that a trained artist can deploy is deeper than the fabric covering the body. The skin covering human anatomy might also be seen as superficial. The thousands of hours of study of the human form by a trained artist allows them to infer, to imagine, and envision, or to see the musculature and underneath that, the bone structures that are alluded to on the surface topography of the body through various landmarks on the skin. The trained artist can see those inner structures clearly under the skin, even though they are elusive. In a way, imagining for a trained artist is possibly an analogous process to the imaging of machines. See how you can see the other side of this wireframe model house. And behold how, as line is eliminated by surface, the see-through characteristic of the wireframe completely disappears. When you look at the light playing across the house, you can imagine, infer, envision, see in your mind's eye what might be within or on the other side, but you can't actually see it. But look at the wonderful quality and the sense of surface and how it describes form, particularly when that surface is lit appropriately by light and shade. This is what we are looking at in this little explainer. The magic of how light and shadow reveals form and how you can utilize this phenomenon. When we do this, we could just call it shading forms, but I often like to call it rendering forms, using values in between light and black and white in the case of our drawing. I think of it as creating a sense of surface. Let's go back to that dark room again. We're not a prisoner this time. Relax. You are just in a really dark room, the dimmest hint of light in it. And perhaps on a table that you are standing over, there is a sheet of black Bristol board. You can't see it in the dark. You fumble around, feel it, you take it up, and you wrinkle it up into a ball. And then you try and make it flat again. And of course, you can't quite fully flatten it. If you run your hands over it, you can feel it has a topographic form. It contains volumes. You can just dimly see some of the light and low, the high and low areas in the dim light. So you take a can of flat black spray paint. You shake it and... No, wait a minute, that won't work. Let's think of something else that will work. You take a can of bright white spray paint. You shake it. You hold it very low down, close to one side of the Bristol board topography, and you spray it across the surface at a very low angle. Behold, in the dim light, the white paint catches that dim light and reveals the topography of the Bristol board in a similar way to how light passes across a complexly modeled surface. In a way, the effect of the focused spray paint particles are much like photons, if photons are actually particles, striking a surface and illuminating it. Notice how planes or facets that face the paint source receive so much more paint and are so much more illuminated. The backsides, the shade, receives very little and is difficult and what was a difficult to discern topography on the surface of the Bristol board has now become obvious. Between light and dark are various gradations on various planes dependent on their angle toward or away from the spray paint. Here's a comparison to illuminated topographic map. Look closely at it. You should be able to tell where the light is coming from. Can you tell approximately where the light source is? The European oil painting tradition, both secular and sacred, is profoundly theatrical. Oil painting, live theater, oil painting. I look to the traditional oil painting, traditional oil paintings for inspiration as an animation background painter when painting classically rendered and lit backgrounds. But I also look to live action film. I realized that the same theatrical concepts and principles of lighting seem to apply to traditional theatrical oil paintings, theater, live action film, and animation backgrounds. Carefully designed lighting was crucial for all of these in order to create a sense of the location being a stage for characters to interact and narratives to unfold. As a student of the effect of light and shade on form, you would do well not just to look at painting, but also cinematography and filmmaking. Film noir and neo-noir are fantastic genres to study for carefully designed lighting schemes to heighten drama. Here's an aside. Look at this painting. Where is the light coming from, and why would that be? As well as long shots in movies that provide a stage-like setting, pay careful attention to close-ups of faces and how light and shade will play over them to describe the form of the face and also add psychological impact. Now here's a self-portrait by Rembrandt. Look at how he casts shadow over the eyes for psychological effect. Now compare it to these classical film noir shots. For extraordinary lighting schemes in painting, do look to the work of Edward Hopper with its drenching, sharply focused, often low, possibly early morning light. In fact, Hopper apparently often built models for some of his paintings and directed light on them in the studio. Many of Hopper's night scenes have the same kind of sensibility as film noir. Here's a well-known etching by him as well. I've heard filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock might get up early to film in order to capture the long shadows of the early morning for dramatic effect. I've done the same thing myself in these paintings. For them, I painted from photographs because the light changes so rapidly. I could not find the time to finish a painting before it moved. Prior to photography, I would presume artists made small, quick monochrome sketches to capture light and shade on form as they preferred it, and at a time that they preferred it, and then, as the light changed, continue to paint on the finished piece, referring to what was before them for detail and color, and using the small, quick sketch for the lighting direction only. Whether making sketches or taking photo reference, an artist who wants to describe form with light and shade needs to put careful consideration into their lighting schemes. For our purposes as basic drawers, a sharply focused light source will work best. This sharply focused light provides a clearer delineation between light and shadow on the form than a more diffuse light source, and presents crisper shapes for us to describe with our shading. See these watercolor sketches by artist Wendy Artin. And here's a drawing by Artin. See how the light plays over the foot, much like the spray paint played over the Bristol board to reveal subtle topographical detail. Here are some of my own watercolor sketches done from life drawing sessions that describe shade with light and form. These wash sketches can be done very quickly in 20 to 30 minutes or less. Watercolor washes might be the best way for some of you to work in this section of the course if you have the materials, but most of us won't, and working with crayon will suffice just as well. Here is a diffuse and less focused light on a figure. Notice how the area between light and shade is less defined, less clear, more gradated. It has a lovely nuanced quality, but as a beginner we might find it more complex to draw. There is a parallel to this difficulty that is similar to the difference between drawing smooth-skinned younger people or children compared to drawing adults who have a more chiseled who have more chiseled features and more clearly defined, haggard, if you will, plane changes in the structure of their face. In these smoother scenarios, the young people and the less focused lighting, there is a filleting effect that makes the form appear less chamfered. It becomes a challenge to decide exactly where a curve falls off into one plane or another. In the Renaissance and beyond it, diffused but directed light was much sought after by expert artists. In the Renaissance, a small open court might be covered with a gauze to diffuse directional light from above. Similarly, you might have heard that historically artist studios and lofts prefer skylights or full windows on a north side in order to provide a steady, unchanging and unharsh light to illuminate their paintings in progress. And if the artist is working from subject matter on hand, perhaps a human model or objects, the north light will bathe the subject in a softer and more gradated light similar to the figure we first looked at. Here's some examples of artist studios and artists at work in the diffuse north light. Here's one that actually seems to be gloomy enough to be night. It's alleged to be a Rembrandt painting of his studio and easel. Notice how similar it is to an animation background painting. And here is an abomination for a studio. It's probably from the sort of architectural rag like Dwell magazine, which features modern, designy looking homes and buildings that look good in a magazine but must be excruciatingly unpractical to live in. Consider how damaging this direct sunlight would be to your ability to see as it rakes across your painting. And if you were working from a subject or a model, consider how quickly, as the sun races around the sky, the lighting would change. Within 20 minutes, everything would be different. In the next few videos, including the live demos, you'll see how we can model and increase the illusion of form in drawings and painting with primary light sources and secondary or bounced light sources. Here's an anecdote about makeup. In one of my longer classes, a design class for jewelry students, the class were asked to give individual presentations on something to do with the subject of design. Anything is a broad-ranging subject. Anything that they might be interested in looking into or might know something about and be willing to share with the class. Obviously, there were presentations on jewelry traditions, styles, artists, technologies related to art and design of jewelry, and other things. But one person, astonishingly to me, because I'm oblivious to the subject, came in and gave a session on makeup, something she had worked on for many years. The class and I were gobsmacked. I have no knowledge or interest in the motives for applying makeup, but it became apparent that it is more than just putting on colored lipstick and eyeshadow. It involves modeling the form of the face, of painting with makeup to make pudgy faces look thinner and thin faces look thicker, big noses smaller and small noses bigger, and stuff like that. It manipulates it uses some of the very concepts that we're studying to manipulate the sense of volume and surface on a face with the illusion of light and shade. It's almost like a kind of subtle Trompe l'oeil painting of the face. I've often shown the Dove commercial evolution to drawing classes for completely different reasons, but the makeup demo made me look at the magic at work in the first part of this little film, the manipulation of form by makeup, completely differently. I had already recognized the mutagenic magic of photoshopping in the last part of the commercial. Back to filmmaking, where lighting is as established a visual design trade as it is supremely complex. Different situations beg different lighting, from studios, indoor locations, and outdoor locations. Daylight doesn't cut it. You have probably seen the assortments of lights available when filming is taking place on city streets. There are primary light sources, secondary light sources, and fill lighting for in between, and many other subtle illuminations, but the basic ones are precisely in line with what we will be studying in this segment of the basic drawing course. Product photography is another highly skilled visual occupation and has the magical capacity to evoke a visceral desire for objects and substances as a result of a carefully designed photograph. Jewelry students who are taking my jewelry and design classes will actually spend some time learning the basics of this skill from one of the professional jewelers that teach in the program. They learn how to design and illuminate light boxes with the very effects of light and shade that we are learning about and applying in this segment of the drawing course. Jewelers have the further complication when photographing their work of having to design a situation that allows for simple and provocative reflections on polished metal parts of their jewelry art, as well as the stones on it that might range from reflective to translucent. Landscape painting in the fine arts, or in animation, or in film can also have the effects of light and shade apply to it for increasing drama and tension. As you look into the distance at landforms or clouds, they can be variously put into light or shade. 19th century landscapes present a pinnacle of drama with their fixation on the disturbingly sublime. The similarity between paintings from the art historical record and filmmaking can be compelling. As a lover of 19th century landscape painting, as well as someone who applied similar lighting schemes to landscapes in animation backgrounds, I inevitably incorporated such schemes into my own personal painting, both consciously and subconsciously. Notice how in many of these landscapes, as well as the backgrounds. The foreground elements are thrown into shade. This is to focus the attention of the eye on the midground, which might be where character action takes place. We will discuss this device later in a look at aerial perspective. All of these manifestations and applications of illumination and the effects of light and shade to describe form are rooted in the basic drawing concepts that we are looking at in this section of the course. And then there is this. Look at this. This painting by Klimt employs none of what we have been discussing. At the beginning of the 20th century, forces were at work. The relatively new technology of the camera and its ability to flatten, to crop radically, and create drama through simple, punchy graphic effect, as well as the advent of posters as a pop art form, which were also flat and graphic as a result of mass production techniques and the need to create quick drama to catch the eye of the public ever so briefly. No visual loitering. As well, there was almost certainly a fatigue and a desire for radical new ways of seeing amongst classically trained artists who chose to reject the nuance of light and shade on form that they had learned so much about for this novel, graphic, punchy and more decorative effect. To this day, there is an almost insatiable demand for posters of this painting sold at art museums and galleries. What is compelling about this image is not form, but flat shapes, color and texture. If you look at this drawing and wash sketch by Sheila, same era, you will notice again that any sense of form by lighting is suppressed. There are fluctuations in the color of the wash, but when we turn it into black and white, into value, we can see that the wash is pretty much flat. Today, much, possibly most, visual art in galleries, at least in my neck of the woods, is in a way derivative of this flat, graphic, posterized approach. It is a decorative approach that makes arrangements of color and texture look very attractive on the walls of homes. The use of light and shade on form as a drawing or painting technique is well worth understanding for a visual artist. However, it's not the rule. Artists can react against it or embrace it. But to really react against something, you must first fully understand it. And you should be able to understand it fully by mastering it. For a trained visual artist, the use of light and shade to describe form is a choice that might fall at one extreme or the other, or lay anywhere in between. Before we finish part one of this explainer on light and shade, let me show you one more example of the dramatic effect that lighting can have on form. In my most recent stint of occasional drawing instruction, after moving west, I went to the expense and effort of accumulating some useful props and devices to assist with what I was tasking myself to do. As well as objects like cylinders, balls, shiny balls, transparent balls, and a projector to show slides and cast light on forms, I also bought a planes of the head and actually made some plaster casts. One of the casts was of the human back. The great thing about plaster casts is that they have no local color, so the effect of light and shade on them is pronounced and wonderful for shading. No distractions of local color. Here is a close-up of the cast of the back that I made. What type of lighting do you see on it? Where is the light coming from? Can you see much in the way of the physical structure and architecture of the back in this photograph? In this photo, the cast is lit by a diffuse light from above and also from close to the direction of the camera. This means that as planes, edges, turn away from us, they receive less light and get darker. In this case, only subtly because the light is so diffuse. The lighting is in fact overhead fluorescent lighting. Really, the lack of the cast of the back looks very much like an amorphous blob. As a reference for human form and structure, it is utterly useless. Now, What happens when we do when we do with light what we did with the can of spray paint? We rake a more focused light source across the topography of the back, and the effect is truly astonishing. You can see musculature and even bone prominences. For beginner or expert, the basic drawing concept of light and shade describing form and topography is always worthy of consideration.